Welcome to the Dork Forest. Jackie and her pals will never bore us. Shameless confessions
about our obsession
will make us laugh and smile. So let's explore the Dork Forest and dork out for a while.
Hi, Jackie Kashian here. You're listening to The Dork Forest. You know the websites, dorkforest.com, thedorkforest.com if you like a determiner. JackieKashian.com has everything. Both of my podcasts, all of the stand-up stuff, the new album, links to YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, all the things. But so, I think, does dorkforest.com, where you can look at old videos of different shows. Anyway, if you want to support the show, tell people about the show, review it on iTunes, thumbs it up on Pandora or Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. I appreciate that. You can donate. You can donate monthly. PayPal lets you do that. You can also do my Venmo if you like. It's at Jackie Kashian, absolutely everywhere. And my email address is jackie@jackiekashian.com, and that's what the PayPal is. The PayPal link is on jackiekashian.com and dorkforest.com. And go to any of them. Thanks for listening. There's merch. There's stand-up, there's tour guide, you can find out where I'm touring. This is getting long, so let's get into the show. Hey, Jackie Kashian, in my garage with me, Chicago, clearly a native, and stand-up comedy podcaster, Sean Bair-Flannery. Sean, I forgot to ask, you do stand-up, right?
I do stand up. Yes, very much so.
I was like, what just happened? And so we met through other channels, and I was like, he looks like any number of young men that I've met in my life doing stand-up comedy. You got the vibe, brother. It's all working for you. But it's Sean in the cool Irish way.
Correct.
Somebody murder me. SEAN, Bair, BAIR, Flannery, like Flannery, FLANNERY, correct?
You got it.
So at Sean Bair-Flannery on all the things, your TikTok, your Twitter, your Instagram,
everything, my website, everything.
And then you and CJ, who's going to be on the next episode, have a podcast together on Starburns called The Blackout Diaries.
Correct.
What is that about?
That's actually been a live show in Chicago for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And it's stand-up comics plus everyday people telling true drinking stories with photos from the events. So we have like nurses and teachers and cops, like just a whole walk
everybody
of life.
who's willing to share that.
Yeah.
I like that when I was drunk, it was before cameras were invented.
Yes. And that's kind of a blessing, right?
Sure.
You see people losing their jobs now or getting, you see a lot of college students getting thrown out of college. And I'm like, we did that. There was just no way to persist those memories.
You know that my brother was excuse me, my brother Russ is a college professor, and he has had this conversation more than once at the department level where he says, you are a pile of hypocrites if you kick these people out, because we did this and worse, and don't do it. It's like, it's not, I mean, if it's a crime, besides underage drinking, he's like, underage drinking is a crime that is unenforceable. So you can't, and I don't know if he saved any kids, but he tried, by God.
He's fighting the good fight.
He's fighting the good fight for budding alcoholics, or just someone who wants to whoop it up when they're 20 years old. 20 is the time to do it.
Yeah, and you can't think about any of those long-term consequences on a Friday night after you've had 10 beers. You're not thinking about everything that could happen if
you're lucky, you go to a college that's all walkable. And then you don't ever get into a vehicle because you are stumbling around Madison, Wisconsin, which is what I was doing. And if you're unlucky, it's 42 below, and you sadly pass out in a ditch or something, or some sort of snowbank. But then somebody wakes you up, and you keep walking, and then you get home and you don't die. Anyway, I have at least 6 of those stories. Here's the good news. So the Blackout Diaries is a podcast, but it's also, so is it video too? Do you put the pictures?
On our podcast, we tend to use stories that aren't as heavily dependent on the photos, just because it doesn't translate well to that format. So usually in every show, so we're weekly in Chicago, every Friday, 10 p.m. at the Lincoln Lodge. And
oh, that's neat. That's a great
venue. I would say only half the people actually use photos. The other half, they're like, there's no photos from this story. Thank God, And those are
Right.
usually the ones we put on the podcast.
So I asked you for many, and you gave me a nice long list of dorkdoms that you could talk about. And one of them was dive bars. And it's kind of appropriate that I was like, well, then just give me 5 of one of those things.
Mhm.
And you came up with like a nice hearty handful of bars in Chicago that each have their own unique stamp on society. What's happening? They may or may not be
the way I kind of interpreted it is a lot of people want to talk about the 5 greatest dive bars. I can talk about dive bars all day, Jackie. And a lot of people want to like, what are your 5 favorite dive bars? And the way I like to kind of twist that question is I like to talk about the 5 dive bars that I find most instructional. Like this is how you know you're in a dive bar. Each of them has a classic sign of a dive bar, and then that will help you kind of identify dive bars in new cities and so on.
Okay. Now, what do you look for I mean, all I know is that when I walk into a bar, and I obviously I live in stand-up comedy. I live in Los Angeles, so I do stand-up comedy in like a hat shop and a lot of bars and whatever's available, right?
Sure.
And so I did a show in a bar that looked like it used to be just a dirt bag of a bar, but someone had taken a lot of pledge and a lot of elbow grease and it sort of fixed like the holes in the walls and had replaced the upholstery. And I was like, this is the perfect, this is a perfect dive bar. That
sounds like a great dive. I mean, I think one of the first things you notice when you walk in is everyone's looking at you because they're so surprised a new person walked in. Because dive bars are mostly, they don't generate a lot of street traffic, so they're almost, and I think that's why most people don't like them, is it's hard to come over that initial walk into the door where everyone's like, whoa, what's this guy's story?
What's this hipster? And I will say I'm from a little factory town in South Milwaukee, in Wisconsin, called South Milwaukee, in between Cudahy and Oak Creek. You'll see the exits as you go to a larger town. Anyway, so and I've told this story before, but South Milwaukee is made of that's literally the building blocks.
The dive bar capital of the world.
Yes. And so when I would come home from college, I would go to a bar to get away from my parents. And I had been taught to tip every time you got a drink.
Sure.
And the dive bar people do not want to see that. That is not something that they can live up to. So, hey, city mouse, get out of here.
Yeah, you got to learn the protocols of the bar. Like some dive bars, you kind of want to always tip to make friends with the bartender. But you know what they do at a lot of dive bars is they use the kitty. So you're not really supposed to hand over a tip on each one, but you let the tips keep accumulating. So nobody knows how much you're going to tip yet. And you're not sort of like revealing your hand to the other scumbags. And then at the end of the night, you slide it all over and take care of the bartender. These are
tips for career drunks, my friends. It is amazing work is being done here. Okay. So let's go to the first one. The one on Western and Montrose.
Sunnyside Tap. So I used to live by that one. That one is still there. I love that bar. And one of the reasons why it's a dive bar is it opens at 6 a.m.
Oh my gosh, yes.
It opens at 6 a.m.
What time is bar time in Chicago? 4?
I think, so Chicago's weird. There's like a 2-hour window where the city has to dry up. Like the latest you can have a license till is 4 a.m.
Right.
And I think you can only have 4 a.m. on the weekends. I don't think you can do that on weekdays. But then there are only like 3 bars in the whole city that actually open at 6.
Okay.
But the reason I consider it such a dive thing is they're all super old bars. And I like to think that they're a carryover from, I was talking to the owner of Sunnyside Tap about this, actually. It's owned by this couple. They live above the bar. They're in their 70s. And she was saying that bars like that used to be very common in these blue collar neighborhoods because people would have factory jobs. They would finish the night shift. They would want a drink before they went home, but they just got off work at 5 a.m. and these were common. But now, as we all are sort of working in the same hours now, these bars are going away.
Right. Right. Because there's no third shift. There's no place for the third shift to go and have a shift drink, essentially, or a couple of beers and then go home and sleep it out. That's interesting.
Yeah. So I kind of like picture it as a bygone era, like as it kind of shows. It's kind of one of the sadder aspects of dive bars where it showed the standardization of America, how we're all working more and more similar jobs, more corporate jobs and so on. And having a drink at 6 a.m. now is just something straight up alcoholics do, because there's really like no legitimate reason.
I'll tell you something. When my last day job was over in Toluca Lake, California, over near the Burbank studios, and there used to be a place called Papoose Hot Dog Show, and all it was an egg and like BLT place, right? It was just like eggs and bacon for breakfast, BLTs and clubs for lunch, and they had beer, and they opened at 6 a.m. And all the sort of the night watchman guys from the studios and would come, and they would sit at the tiniest of all bars. It had like 5 seats. Everybody else bright-eyed off to their, whatever job they're going to go closed caption something. And and then those guys would sit up there and drink, a couple of beers and then go home and have and maybe have breakfast, right? Maybe
I love that. Like, I love having drinks after work with coworkers. Like, I think it's one of the things I love about bars is I do think it can in some ways like break down like kind of economic tiers. Like in my day-to-day job, I'm never going to be in a meeting with the CIO of my day job. Right. But if we're all out having drinks after work for happy hour, like that's somebody that you might run into.
Tends to like the same kind of bars as you. You're like, oh my God, that's Mary Ann, who's in charge of payroll.
Get to find the secrets,
Yeah, right. That's hilarious. Yes.
The other thing I love about the Sunnyside Tap that is another sign that it's a dive bar is they constantly are asking people to quiet down. Like they own a dive bar and they don't want it to turn into anything else. They have a pool table there. And one time I was with friends who started a pool game, and the owner, I forget her name, but she yells, "Will you shut that racket down? My husband is trying to sleep upstairs." It was 8 p.m.
I've been here since 6. So, right. Yeah.
Dive bars are quiet. They're for kind of conversations, I feel.
Right. You got to solve the world's ills. You got to see, you got to express an opinion. You got to find out, at what level does metal actually melt.
Yeah.
And And will jet fuel do that?
And then that's something I love about dive bars is when I really fell in love with dive bars is, and this is still true to a certain extent, people in dive bars, like a lot of like older people, they're not technology competent. So when these questions come up, I love that if we get in a group argument, we have to solve it with our own memory of high school chemistry. And like there isn't Google because I really hate Google. I feel Google is a conversation killer. I'd rather try and explore these topics ourselves and see what answers we come up with.
Okay. Yeah. So, but I don't mind that. I like trying to, can you remember who that is? Can you remember what that was? Can you remember this? And then have that conversation. And then when we all hit that wall, then I grab my phone.
I think that's fun to finally declare a kind of, okay, we as a group decided Sean's the winner. Let's actually look at Google. Oh, no, he was flat wrong. Jackie had the right answer.
Right. So, okay. So that's, I would love actually a dive bar that had no cell reception.
Oh, I think it's great. And I hate that we're moving more and more to cell phone. Like, I think one of the worst habits that's come out of COVID is that nobody has physical menus anymore. Like, I kind of hate that because I came out to eat with friends or drink with friends to get away from my phone.
And once my phone is in my hand, I'm not just looking at the menu.
Exactly. You're like, oh, I got an email. And the next thing you know, Twitter, you're replying,
Yes. Right. All of a sudden you're at work.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, that's an excellent point. I do love a physical menu more than a QR code. And though I will say one of the things I do like about that came out of lockdown and in COVID is that everybody's cleaning things a lot more.
Well, that's good.
Including the menus. So I'm like, wipe that down. Do that. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
So I was at Disneyland and they literally had 409 on the outside tables. And I was like, good, not just water, not just some
Yeah.
old gray rag. That's gross. Anyway, so yeah, so that's the Sunnyside Tap, Western and Montrose
Western
in
and
Chicago.
Montrose. In Chicago. Great. These are all in Chicago.
Okay. And so
that's in Lincoln Square in Chicago.
That's so funny because you have in some of your notes, which are copious, by the way. I love that you're like, here's an anecdote about the 1800s.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, the dive bars, it's just something about the beer commercials.
Oh, so I originally wrote a lot of these ideas down for a blog, and I thought, you know how we were talking about how bars that open up at 6 a.m. was a sign of factory jobs that have gone away.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the reasons why dive bars have changed over time and why they're going away or why they're opening up at more normal hours. And I've also noticed that it corresponds in a change with beer commercials. Like if you remember beer commercials, I think you and I might be around the same age, but if you remember beer commercials from our childhood, it was really, really common for people to work a job in the commercial, get off their job, like whistle blows, and then they all just get like blasted on Budweiser or something like that.
Right. That was a theme for a little while. And there was, all I remember is that animated Hams bear. Anyway, so
from the Great North Woods or whatever it is. Yeah. That was really weird too. It's like, is this a kid's commercial here? No, we're selling alcohol.
Exactly. Pomegranate vape. Go ahead. So
but now when you watch beer commercials now, it's like everyone seems rich. No one actually has a job, and they're always it's always young, good, like kind of scruffy looking men who somehow have a choice between, oh, do I want this refrigerator full of Bud Light or this, like, my impossibly hot girlfriend? Sorry, right. I'm going to hang out with the Bud Light. And it's like the same trope everywhere you go with beer commercials. And it's like, I consider it like almost like I don't know. It's like, it's showing how society works less and has become more immature. Obviously, my wife says I read too much into everything.
Right. That you certainly have read a lot into that, because I mean, the crazy thing about cars and beer and liquor, and it's always just some dude who is either good, he has regular features. He's, he's TV good looking. Mm-hmm. And then Sexy Magoo comes in and then there's also like some fancy car. Yeah. And is like, when I like to, what is the Dos Equis commercial?
Yeah.
Is that older guy.
Yeah.
Who's like, when I don't do this a lot, but when I do, it's Dos, mm-hmm. You're like, I think you do this a lot. And the vibe I'm catching from you, brother, is that you're out. You're on the prowl. You're looking for it. And so the commercials did, I think, in the 80s when yuppies kind of got invented, or in the early 80s there was Miami Vice. Like, there was a lot of suit coats with t-shirts, and you'll get that's back a little bit in some of the commercials I've seen for booze, where a guy is wearing a suit coat. And I was like, I can't tell you the last time I saw a guy wear a suit coat, unless it was like some sort of gimmick, right? Like, I'm the comic that wears a suit coat, but like just normal walking around people, guys that go to office jobs, but nobody's gone to an office job in 3 years. So everyone's really wearing a polo. They might be wearing a collared shirt over a t-shirt. Yeah. And that's the whole vibe, it's, so to put that in a commercial is weird.
Yeah. I think, and I think it is about that time, the mid 80s, where beer commercials have just, all alcohol commercials have just gotten less and less almost realistic, not I feel there was a time when drinking commercials were semi-realistic, or at least portray. Like, I remember my uncles used to drink this beer in Cleveland, Ohio, that was called Schaefer's. Mm-hmm. And when I graduated high school in the mid 1990s, you could get a 30 pack of Schaefer's for $2. It was called a Weekender. Yeah. But their actual slogan, that I do think is a very honest slogan, was one beer to have when you're having more than one.
Oh my God. That's
which is just
hilarious.
an admission. It's an admission that you would only binge drink us. Like that's the only reason we exist.
You're going to a party that nobody can afford anything.
Yeah.
This isn't even a solo cup party.
Old Milwaukee's slogan used to be the one beer to buy when you're buying. Like in other words, like if you're stuck with the purchasing for everyone, buy us, you know, and there used to be this kind of honesty about why you would drink beer that has all gone out the window now.
Right, which I think coincides with the rise of rehabs. And they're just like, yeah, let's not encourage that.
Yeah.
Because I think the beer that we used to get there was a beer called Huber. Okay. And like Leinenkugel was is now some sort of hipster beer. But Leinenkugel used to be like $6.50 for a case. Mm-hmm. And that included the bottle deposit. And then, but Huber was something like $4.50 a case, and that included the bottle deposit, $1.20 in bottle deposit, a nickel a bottle. So what about the one on Clark and Wilson?
Oh, that is, I love Wrigleyville North. I think is Clark
Max and Friends or
Max and Friends. No, I'm sorry. That is Clark and Wilson. Yes, I apologize. Yeah. It's just north of there. That is still there, I believe. I went by there like last month. I used to live by that, and I used to like that. And there's many aspects I like about that. But one of the things, how you know you're in a dive bar that always would happen, I would always notice this at Max and Friends, is the bartenders don't trust any of their customers. Like, right. They're checking Max's and Friends would check every bill above a single for counterfeit. Like they wouldn't even believe that their customers could have a 5 on them.
Oh my God. That's insane.
And they would always, like if one of them had to go leave to the restroom, they would have somebody else like watch all the customers just for even a short break, because they just honestly thought that everyone was going to bum rush the bar and take all the product. Like there was just this total level of distrust, which I loved about that bar.
That is amazing.
They also had like weird, another thing you'll see with like dive bars is they would have weird like off-market sports paraphernalia. Like they were so cheap they wouldn't be willing to pay for officially licensed like Chicago Sox posters and all that. Okay. So everything would be like a little bit off, you know.
Right. Do you have to pay to have a White Sox poster in your bar?
You don't. I don't think you have to pay any extra. You just have to be willing to go
buy an actual White Sox poster.
Yeah, to buy it. You know.
So they're like just a poster of baseball. It's great.
Like exactly. It would be like almost like stock image or something like that, and then they would write something about the Sox.
Okay.
They're just a weird. And the conversations were so great there. Like just the weirdness you would hear. I remember one guy distinctly walking in, and you know. The cool thing about a dive bar is they'll let you kind of walk in whatever makes you comfortable makes us comfortable. Like they're almost all dog friendly. Almost every dive bar I've been to will allow dogs. And this guy walks in with a dog, and the guy behind the bar is like, "Oh man, what kind of dog is that?" And the guy goes, "Canine." And he goes, "Canine? I've heard of those. Great kind of dog." I just like, you just always heard weird stuff like that.
That's a great line. The one time I had to go into a bar with a dog, I told my brother I would dog sit. So I went and I did a weekend. No, it was a one-nighter in North Dakota.
Okay. And
I couldn't leave the dog in the motel because they wouldn't let me. And I couldn't leave the dog in the car because it was winter. So I was like, "Can I bring the dog in?" And the bar was like, because it was just a one-nighter. So it was just this town has maybe 3,000-4,000 people in it. And everyone's in this bar for the comedy night on a Friday. And I come in and I'm like, "Can I bring the dog?" And they're like, "Yes, please bring the dog." And then somebody said, "What kind of dog?" "That's a new dog. We've never seen that dog around here." "Is that a new dog?" And I was like, they said what kind of dog it was. I was like, "It's a pound dog. It's a mutt. I don't know. We got it at the pound." And yeah, people were adorable with the dog.
Yeah, and I think that's great that dogs have to have the time of their lives in bars, because everyone loves seeing drunks love petting dogs. Like,
Yep.
Oh, you want belly rubs? Like
Yeah.
They never get bored of a dog's attention.
Free pretzels. This is a dog that will throw up later because that dog's been given beef jerky or maybe even a pickled egg. You don't know. There could be a pig foot.
And now, every bar in Chicago is moving towards like outside pad like that. I said something that was bad about COVID, which was the loss of tactile menus. One thing that is good about COVID is we let everyone have outdoor space. Like it used to be a really like arduous process with the city of Chicago to have an outdoor cafe outside of your bar. But during COVID, like they removed a lot of those barriers and everybody has an outdoor cafe, which means everybody's dog friendly, which I think is great. But I really feel dive bars were at the forefront of all of this.
Very much so. And because Minneapolis also has more street eating, like it bleeds out into the parking spaces, which is fine. And then it's February and you're like, can I make love to that outdoor heater? You're like, yes, you can. But then they close it in. And during the lockdown or right after the lockdown, when everybody, we're still getting COVID, but took a test this morning, negative. Nice. Anyway, so but they were, in the winter cities of the world, they were putting up windbreaks so that people didn't freeze to death while they ate a sandwich, and but then also trapping in all of our air. So
then you wonder why aren't you just inside at that point? But I've even seen in Chicago they have for the winter like almost like these mini Epcot centers. It's like a dome that would just fit like a family of 4 inside it.
Right. They'll make little tiny little pods.
And it looks kind of cool because it looks almost like a Santa's village when you see like 20 of them like in a parking lot. So like that part looks kind of cool. But at that point, it's like, well, I mean, I get maybe the thought is, okay, we know we're all negative with COVID, so we won't catch it because we're isolated. I get that must be the thought. I'm always like, well, at that point, I just want to go into the bar and meet new people if I'm.
Oh, right, because you're a social animal.
Yeah, I'm an extrovert. Yeah.
By the way, Sean Bair-Flannery. Bair is spelled B-A-I-R. It's at Sean Bair-Flannery everywhere you want to go. You wrote a book, and we're going to plug that book right now. Places I Can't Return to. This is also, it makes me think about dive bars.
A lot of dive bars in the book.
Is there?
Yeah.
Okay. But places, is that available now at?
It is available. It's available at my website. All the links to buy each version, whether it's audio, digital, or paperback, are all available at SeanBair-Flannery.com.
Okay.
And yeah, it's a book. Some of it is drinking story. It's actually a book that breaks into thirds, and each chapter is a place I can't go back to. And then I intermix like the history of the city with the story. So like there's a lot of historical asides and all that, but about a third of them are jobs I can't go back to. A third of them are just places from my childhood that don't exist, like in their kind of family. So like I grew up in a big Irish Catholic family, and a third of them are dive bar stories where the bars are just gone.
Right. Are there actual towns you can't return to? Like an entire?
No, I don't think there's any towns I'm not welcome at. So
it's like they're not going to give you the key to the city, but you could come. You could show up.
That's a good way to explain how I travel.
All right, just keep it together. Keep it in your pants this time. All right, thank you. Okay, and then you had just mentioned Wrigleyville North, which is Sheridan and Grace, I think.
Yes, that is a great dive bar. Now, what the sign? This is another sign. These are all. Everything I'm going with here is these are signs for you to know you're in a dive bar. And Wrigleyville North has something that almost all dive bars have, where it's almost impossible to find. Like there's zero signage. Like people have been in there, but
you gotta know.
People have been in there, but nobody actually ever learned the name while visiting. Like nothing's branded inside. Like the menus don't have any of the bar's name or anything like that. And Wrigleyville North was hilarious because not only did it not have a sign, it was at this weird intersection where Sheridan, which is a north-south street for 90% of its distance, for one block turns into an east-west street, and then it goes back to north-south. it was at that intersection. So it was technically at the intersection of Sheridan and Sheridan.
Okay.
So you would try to explain this to people, like, where's Wrigleyville North? And you're like, it's at Sheridan and Sheridan. And nobody would believe me because it is such a small dive bar right next to Wrigley Field. And millions of people walk by it each day and never even notice it. And people would be like, they treated me like, Flannery, this is a mirage. Like, you think you went into a dive bar. You're telling me there's a dive bar at Sheridan and Sheridan right next to Wrigley Field, and there's just no way it exists.
Right. Oh, that's so weird.
And I think some of our best times happen at places where you almost can't explain where you were at.
Oh, right. Yeah. Oh, there are many places that I can't explain where I was at, but that doesn't necessarily
mean it was, they weren't flat correctly.
It's I think other people could have explained exactly where I was at, but I didn't. I was trying to ride a bicycle without a chain. So it's all sort of problems there. But I like the idea that difficult to explain makes me wonder about dive bars. The dive bars that I've been in to do stand up in the last 20 odd years, you're always like, did you set out to create a dive bar, or did you go into business to have a bar and then just get bored and just let it kind of deteriorate? And you're like, I'm just going to hang out with Larry and whoever Larry brings, and it's going to be fine.
Jackie, I have always wondered that. And I've debated that with friends and everything. And I think right now I lean towards no one tries to open a dive bar. And that they were probably successful at a certain time in their, but then a sign broke and they didn't have the money to fix it, and then something else broke and they didn't have the money to fix it. And what you're just looking at is 30 years of financial shortcomings.
Yeah, bring a wire hanger. I got to hang this thing back up. And you're like, okay.
Have you ever met Adam Burke, who's a Chicago comic?
Yes.
He does a lot of NPR shows. He and I were at a dive bar a few months ago. He actually edited my book. And we were at a dive bar. It's actually called, I think it's called something like The Camp. Or something like that. And it's on Cicero Avenue in Chicago. And it's this dive bar that's themed after a ski lodge. And when you go in there, it's all wood. But anyways, as we're talking, like, we're one of 10 people in there, we realize, like, we're meeting the owner. And then he's like, oh, I bought it off Tommy down there. And then we're talking to Tommy. Tommy's like, oh, I bought it off Willie down there. And then we're talking to Willie. And we realized we were the only people in this bar who hadn't owned it in the last 20 years. So I think dive bars, you just sell them to another regular to get rid of them.
Another regular who has always wanted it to be called Stumble In. You're just like, I'm changing the name. That's the first thing I'm doing. I'm going to I'm going to take all of my money, all $300.
Yeah.
And I'm going to buy a new sign. And it's going to be called Left Field or whatever,
Stumble In is great. That's a good one.
I like to drive around Milwaukee and look at the names of bars.
Oh,
I like to drive around Wisconsin and look at the names of bars, because people are, the winter is long. People are lonely. They got some time on their minds. I think I'm going to change it to, it's going to be there was a gay bar in Minneapolis called the Ballpark. And I was like, oh, subtle. So, but I do love the names of
they're
bars.
great.
It's the only thing I can get my husband to do when we drive around Milwaukee, because he's always like, it's kind of sad here. And I'm like, well, why don't you invest in something, then make it less sad?
He could get a happy bar named.
Right. Or we can drive around and look at the names of bars and laugh and laugh and laugh. So
Milwaukee's the best city. In my book, I mentioned how I intersperse a lot of times the history of different cities and so on. And I end up, there's a chapter essentially on Milwaukee. And it was fascinating to read Milwaukee's history. Did you know when Milwaukee still, as you probably know, has the highest bar to person ratio of any city in America.
Is that still happening?
That is still happening.
Well, we've had that for, I was weaned on Pabst and Ho-Hos, my friend. So I know.
When it was incorporated, though, it was as low as, I believe, 9-1, 9 people for every bar. Like that's insane.
Yeah. That's nuts.
But maybe in the 19th century, it's like you got banned from so many places that you're like, oh, well, I can't go to Stumble Inn anymore. So I got to go. So they needed 9-to-1 ratio. I don't know.
Right, the next block over. You know, in a lot of cities, like in the city of South Milwaukee, there used to be 3 bars surrounding my grade school. And in a lot of cities, there's a law that you can't have like liquor stores and bars
within
really
so many
close.
seat. Yeah.
Right. That is not. So there used to be a bar called the Steeple Chase or the Steeple something. And then there was a bar across the way that was just had somebody's name like Al's. And then there was a bar on the kitty corner across from the park. There was the school, and then there was the woods, Ross and Woods right next door. And then across from that was another bar. And then across the street from the Steeple was a liquor store. And all the teachers would come out of school and go to the Steeple. And then they would go to the liquor store, and then they would go home. Then they would come to school. Then they would go to the Steeple. Then they go to the liquor store. Then they go home.
Oh my gosh!
It was it was really. Now, had you ever heard? And I've told this story before too. But there's 900 episodes, you guys. Who knows if you've heard this one? Rangers of the Dork Forest. So, Chicago fire. A lot of the breweries in Chicago burned down, and all of the railroads in the country, in the northern part of the country, would end up in Chicago, refill, turn around, go back to the coasts. And that's how it worked. So the beer that made Milwaukee famous, which I think was Schlitz, was that old
That
Milwaukee?
is absolutely correct. After the Chicago fire. Yeah.
Yeah. So they didn't have any beer. So they had to send to Milwaukee for beer. And that's when it was 1861, 1871.
Yeah. And I can't remember the name of the owner of Schlitz, but he brought railroad cars worth of beers down to give to displaced Chicago, which I love that's like his first instinct.
He's like, you know what? People don't have enough beer down there. And plus it's in lieu of food. And somebody I just saw on Jeopardy the other day, because my mother-in-law lives with us now and we watch Jeopardy.
Okay.
That the guy who founded Guinness patented his beer in 17 whatever or 16 whatever for 9,000 years. He was like, yeah, this is going to be mine. It could be public after 9,000 years.
I did not know that.
Bill Guinness. I don't know what the hell
that's
his name
hilarious.
Was, but
it's going to be pretty popular. So I don't want to give it up too soon.
Exactly. And turns out it all worked out for him and his descendants and everybody. So
oh my God, that's great. Do you know what I just learned about Guinness that I thought was fascinating is, so I've known before, and I've heard many people also repeat this, that Guinness, the beer company, also owns Guinness World Records. That they published that book, and they've been publishing it for over 100 years. And I've also heard before, and I've heard many people say that it was essentially created to give to tavern owners when they bought a keg of Guinness to settle bar debates. So you could say like, no, the tallest person. So it was like a 19th century Google.
Really?
But this is like the part that I just learned like within the last week that I found hilarious. The reason why the head of Guinness, I don't know if it's the same guy who opened the 9,000 year patent or not, but the reason where he came up with this idea is he would do like a yearly sales conference where all his top salespeople would like meet at some like estate in Ireland, and they would like pigeon shoot and talk about strategies for selling Guinness. And they all come back to this like CEO, and he's like, all right, what do you got for me? He's like, I got to level with you, boss. And apparently the head guy missed a pigeon, and they spent the whole week arguing about how fast a pigeon was, and they got nothing done. And the CEO had an idea. We got to come up with a book to settle these debates, or like the Irish are never going to get anything done.
Wow. I did not know that the beer company Guinness started the Guinness Book of World Records.
Yes.
It really, I would have said, and this would be anecdotal. I'm making this anecdote up as we speak. I think it was started that the people of Guinness is that they were sitting in a bar hammered, and they just said, how fast can you run to go get me a sandwich and back or whatever? And he's like, Jimmy can do it faster. I don't think you know this. And he's like, all right, I got this. Elizabeth has her bike. Bike's not allowed. You're like, who's making the rules? Well, it turns out this beer is on me. And that's how I would have wanted that to have.
Well, you're not too far off.
Not too
I mean,
far
your
off, because I
your
bet you they
instincts are
were
right.
drinking. Yes,
Yeah.
they were probably drinking at the
I
time.
used to read that as a kid. I used to be fascinated by those kind of like little. I used to be fascinated with baseball stats and like those Guinness stats.
There was a certain time, and I lasted maybe a month, but there's some more analytical minds that I was surrounded by that were 8 to 11 years old that would just rabbit hole completely
Yeah.
into like numbers and numbers and numbers. And if you think about fantasy baseball, Jimmy Pardo did the Dork Forest about fantasy baseball, and he called it fantasy accounting. And I don't know if he wrote that, but he's right.
Yeah,
And-
totally.
Yeah.
I mean, you're clocking in. I mean, it's a job.
Right,
You know?
you have to pay attention to
Yeah.
exactly what's going on absolutely everywhere. So that is kind of fascinating. What about this one on 26th and Wentworth?
That one, Wally's, unfortunately, I believe closed
Ethel's
just before
Party.
locked. Oh no, that's Ethel's Party. All right, I got the addresses mixed.
Oh,
Ethel's
yeah.
Party. Ethel's Party might be open. Ethel's Party was a completely illegal bar, so it was never licensed by the city. At one
Okay.
point, it was at one point it was a funeral home, and it would get like you'd get some strangers that would come in because it was considered to be one of the most haunted bars in Chicago.
Okay. Yeah, because it was a funeral home. They were
Yeah.
dealing with the dead. at all
Do you guys
times.
get? Yeah, I'm sure they have ghost tours in it. I know they have to have ghost tours in Los Angeles. I'm sure.
My friend Karen Rontowski, big ghost fan and conspiracy fan of a conspiracy. She will put that flag on the pole and raise it herself. And I love her dearly. And she's a great comic, like a really great joke writer. But she does think that there are a lot of ghosts in the world, so she would know that. I don't know it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's a modestly big subculture in Chicago, and there's like 5 bars that are known haunted bars in Chicago, and this was one of them. This also,
I like that nobody's like picking like a gym. You know what's haunted? This gym where I should go work out.
Well, I mean, that's probably because everyone's drunk in a bar. So things that would have an explanation everywhere else, like you attribute to a ghost in a bar.
Exactly. And then there's like, let's go do some research. I understand that this place where I can chop vegetables and feed, I don't know, people who are hungry for a long time, it might be haunted. No, we're not going there. But I also heard that this place that has Jägermeister on tap, that place is haunted. Let's go check that out.
Sold. So yeah, you would sometimes get, and those would be the only strangers that would walk in. It would be mostly regulars, but it was the most weirdly and greatly illegal bar I've ever been to. So it was on the border of Chinatown, Bridgeport, and like this section of like housing projects. So it was like the most diverse. There'd only be like 15 people in there.
Yeah.
But everyone had a totally different background, like just wildly different background. And that was pretty cool about it.
Yeah.
And then there would be like these like random wrestling matches would break out and like feats of strength, like just old drunk guys, like arm wrestling and stuff that would never fly at a real bar was always allowed here. But
there was a nail gun.
There was a nail gun. They were always doing weird construction. There'd be like boiling liquids. Like they were always like working on the bar while it was open.
Wow.
Which again, I think is because it's illegal. Like I don't think you can. I mean, you shouldn't be doing construction around drunks. Like if you actually care about your establishment or people.
And the weird thing is maybe that's their cover. Like if the cops come in, they're like, this actually is just a party.
These are my employees,
right? These are they're helping me build things, and we're having a party while we build things.
Maybe it was. I always wondered how I just assumed they paid off the cops, but I always wondered how they.
I'm told that's an attainable goal as well.
Yeah, especially in Chicago. But what I loved, its dive bar feature that I loved, and we were alluding to this a little bit earlier, but it was just everyone was a hilarious liar. Just impossible. Like they would say, one guy there claimed he knocked out Bobby Hall in his prime, like the great hockey player who was like known as one of the toughest hockey players of all time. Yeah. Like they would all they wouldn't claim, like a normal liar might say like, oh, I got a blue belt in karate or something, but they would claim, no, I knocked out like the toughest Chicagoan of all, and they would all make weird claims like that.
My brother Russ once said that Batman was our uncle and Robin was our cousin. And I was like, That's
How
the
old were
kind of
you?
lie. Oh, he was like 8.
Yeah,
So I think
those kind of lies, like childish lies. as
childish
an adult.
lies as a grown-up person.
Yeah,
Just going, I don't know if you know this, but I
Yeah.
was once Miss America. What? Yes. A lot of people don't. I was like,
and they,
I
have you ever
have a
noticed-
phone.
they act like you're not going to look it up. Now, I will say some of these people just don't live in the technology world, so they don't know that. But they'll also they always prefix it with, and I feel like you can always know you're with a liar when they say this. They'll say something ridiculous, and they go, "Oh yeah, I never told you that," and they're sort of surprised it never came up, and it's because they're making it up on the spot,
Right? They're vamping for time. She's like, "Oh really? I never told you that." Later, scrolling. My father actually has more than once, maybe just once, and let's cut him some slack. One time, he told me that I should make up awards for stand-up comedy. He was like, well, just tell them that you were, the 2012 funniest person in Paris. And I was like, Dad, you can't just make up awards. And he's like, yeah, you can. Tell them you got it in France. And I was like, they have the internet in France.
You got it in France.
And he said, I promise you no one checks. And I'll tell you, remember Steve Rannazzisi?
Yeah, oh yeah.
He told people for 20 years that he was in a tower at 9/11.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and still works.
Yeah.
So nobody gave a shit.
I'm kind of with your dad.
Yeah. So is Steve, I guess.
I mean, I'm not necessarily with your dad that it's the right career move. I agree with him that I don't think the bookers at Yuck Yucks is actually doing Providence on all the resume checks.
Right. They're not. Yeah. The checking of the Providence. Yeah, they're not doing it. But I will say that it felt like, I mean, if that's how I'm gonna, it's weird. It's a weird thing to tell your child. Just tell them lies.
Yeah, I mean, it is funny how, I mean, I feel
my
all
dad
us
doesn't even
comics,
drink too.
Yeah, that's just a sober advice. We all get weird advice from people like that, like,
Right.
well, just send Saturday Night Live a tape,
Yeah,
Just
right.
send them a tape.
Have you called NBC? Have you called them? And I was like, what do you mean? And there's, of course, that old joke that's been massaged 1,000 times. I got a deal with HBO, 12 months for $11 a month or whatever. Like it's some sort of variation on that. Like I got it's Netflix, it's whatever it is. Anyway, yeah. So I like the idea. Like you even quoted like a helicopter story.
One guy, it was one of the funniest lies I've ever heard, is he claimed that he outran a police. So in Montana I don't know if this is still true. At the time, Montana had no speed limit. And
That's
you could
right.
drive whatever you want. But
And it was $10. If they thought you were driving, because I've heard any number of comics talk about how they get pulled over. They're like, you're actually unsafe. We're going to give you a $10 fine. And that's it. And any number of comics would hand the cop 100 and go race you to the border. So, yeah.
So that's funny because I'm glad you told me that, because I always wondered why this guy. So this liar claimed that he was going so fast in Montana, they decided it was unsafe.
Okay.
And so he claims that like 10 state highway patrol cars are behind him, starts at the eastern parts of the state. They all run out of gas, says a helicopter comes says he outruns the helicopter, makes it to, is it Washington, Idaho? I'm failing my US geography. What's the next state west? He makes it to the next state. He says there's a line of cops like a blockade, like Smokey and the Bandit.
Smokey and the Bandit.
He gets past the state line. He says the Idaho cop or whatever state he's in walks up, shakes his hand. He says, I want to shake the hand of a man that outrun a police helicopter. And he claims this is 100% true story. That
guy is 100% lying. 100%. I don't even believe he owns a car. That guy is so full of it. I can't even.
But I love those kind of lies. And I even love it when a person that should have a team of publicists makes those kind of lies. Like Will Chamberlain, I don't know, like Will Chamberlain's book is hilarious. Like Will Chamberlain's book is all those kind of lies. I forget what it was called, But like Wilt Chamberlain,
didn't he say he slept with 1 million women or something?
He claimed he slept with like 30,000 women. It's like people have crunched the numbers. It's just impossible at a time managed. Like there's no way he could have done it while playing in that many games.
Not enough minutes in the day. Right.
He said he beat Bobby Fischer in chess. Or no, not chess. I'm sorry. He said it was checkers. He said like Bobby Fischer wouldn't play me in basketball and I wouldn't play him in chess. So I beat him in checkers. Like there's no way that's true. And he also made a claim that he drove from New York to LA in something like 17 hours or something like that straight, but yeah, he had all these hilarious lies.
Yeah. Wow. That is, that's pathological. Sometimes the lying is so pathological, but at least if you're drunk, you could go, well, I was drunk.
Yeah.
And then I said, I don't know if you know this, but I once juggled dogs. And you're like, you didn't juggle dogs. No dogs are allowing you to do that.
Well, and I kind of find
dropping dogs. So
like pathological lie, you don't want people like that in your life, obviously. But
that's why I don't go to dive bars.
They're kind of fascinating to talk to, just like I have no
45 minutes to an hour 15. That's what I got for
the lack of repercussion estimates, and I was at a wedding a few years ago and it was in Chicago and I was outside and we're waiting for the bride and groom to come out. And I'm talking to like one of the other, I haven't met him before, but he recently married one of my friends. And I heard rumors that people didn't like him, but I was like, I'll keep an open mind. I've never talked to him before. And I was like, hey, how's your day going? He's like, oh, it's crazy. You didn't hear what happened? And I'm like, no, what happened? He's like, well, we were walking here and a construction crane fell over and killed 10 people. And I'm like, oh my God, like on the way here, like, yeah, I'm like, how'd you get it? Like, you're not a witness or anything like that. He's like, no, they told us they had enough witness. And I'm like, oh my God. So then we go about our separate ways. And at the reception, I mentioned to somebody, I'm like, yeah, did you hear what happened to Henry over there? Like, isn't that? He's like, oh no, it's a lie. I'm like, what? No, there's no way it could be a lie. Like, it's going to be on the news tonight. I mean, I'll know if it's a lie. Why would he? Like, I'm going to talk to his wife in a few minutes. I'll ask, like, there's no way. He's like, it's a lie. And it was a lie. Like, he just made that up. Like, what an insane, like, that's almost divorced from reality.
Not even almost. My buddy Jim Wooster did this joke for a little while. And what was it? It was something about how he was at a party when he was like 30 years old, and he was talking to different people, and he ended up talking to this very pretty woman, and he was like, in the course of the conversation, I guess she said, "Well, I'm nuts. I'm like really high maintenance," and he said, "Well, it's been nice meeting you." And he walked away. He was like, when I turned 30, I had to let that go. Yeah. I don't want any part of whatever conscious drama that you are enjoying creating. I don't want, not a chance. And yeah.
Well, she's self-actualized. She knows what she is.
She knows she's a mess. And there's a chance for help is what I want to say, people. And that is nuts. Ethel's party on 26th and Wentworth. I kind of just want to go. I don't know when I'll be back in Chicago, but I really want to. I like the Lincoln Lodge. By the way, I am talking with Sean Bair-Flannery. He has a new book called Places I Can't Return To, and he has a podcast on Starburns called The Blackout Diaries. That is hilarious. Now,
you should come to the Lincoln Lodge sometime. They have a new theater, and it's great.
Yeah, I think I did the Den with Bamford the last time.
The Den's great too. The Den's a little bit bigger, but yeah.
Right, and it's on the same street.
Milwaukee, that's correct. Yeah, they're very close to each other, actually.
Right, just like 2 or 3 miles apart. And
correct.
So it's my favorite. I like the alti stand-up scene in Chicago a lot better than the standard, just because the clubs are so poorly run that at least the alt place, you're just like, oh, you're theater nerds. And
exactly.
Yeah. So it's run by theater nerds, which I appreciate. The clubs are run by,
it's like the bouncer is also doing the sound and he's bartending, and he actually won't bounce when somebody gets too drunk.
Nobody gets bounced. And terrible. So what about the Four Trays? Damon and Henderson.
Four Trays is still there. Still a great bar. Four Trays, the signal there that you're in a dive bar is only dive bars have carpeting. especially in Chicago. They
Ew,
have
that's
shag
such
carpeting.
a terrible idea.
Terrible idea. Absolutely atrocious idea, but they have it. The Four Trees is actually, I compare it to like the Chrysler building of dives. It has every feature. It may not be the best dive, but it has every feature. Like it's an aluminum siding structure.
Right.
So it looks like a
Okay.
house. You would actually think it's a house if you just drove by. Like the bar takes up like 80% of the space, because if you've ever noticed that in a dive bar, the actual bar usually takes up most of the space. And I think that's because parties don't go to a dive bar. You don't go to a dive bar with a group of 4. It's single drinkers, you know.
Right. It's a row of humans
Yeah.
who are leaning over to say, that's bullshit. And
I love the different. Go ahead.
and my other favorite is order already. I need him. And so
I was in Ireland, and we were at a dive bar in Northern Ireland. So like this, not a very touristy area. And there was a guy there, and his version of "that's bullshit" is one of the best moves I've ever, like, no matter what you said, he'd go, you're wrong there, Sean. Just say that for everything. Just immediately dismissing everything you said. Everything you said, he would say you're wrong on.
So I'm in a cab in Dublin, and I'm told, and I said, we drive by this giant looking kind of pub, and I was like, oh, I was told to go to that. And he goes, it's been a tourist trap since the 1600s. And I was like, yeah, I'm definitely going there. I'm totally, entirely going there. Can you imagine? It's been a tourist trap.
This is the Second Crusade. I don't know if you felt the same, and I don't know if it's because like I have an Irish background. I was amazed at how funny everybody was in Ireland, like the cab drivers and the bartenders, and like they were doing like legit gags and bits. Like they cracked me up.
I was there doing stand-up, and there was an Irish comic who was doing a lot of local stuff, and he was, God, I wish I could remember his name, and he's famous and doesn't need me to remember his name. It's not like he needs the Dork Forest bump, but he was so genuinely funny. Everybody else, we went to like a Viking museum. We didn't really go to anywhere where anybody was, kind of riffing with us. I mostly hung out with comics who I expect to be relatively hilarious, and at least interesting. And but everyone else I talked to, and then we did drive down to Cork County, because I don't know. And then we went to Galway. Anyway, we went on a thing, and everybody was. I didn't notice that everybody was riffing all the time. Everybody, but we weren't in bars. We were in literally one tourist. There was one tourist place where the woman, she was at work, and it was not a great day at work. She was like, I'm sick of you people. And I was like, fair enough. I used to work in the tourist industry in Cape Cod. It isn't fun. I worked at the Dells for a summer. You're not wrong.
Oh my God, the Dells.
Right. I'm the enemy. Here, just take some money and I'll go away with nothing. How about that? I hope your day gets better. So, but everybody was pretty funny.
Yeah. In my trip, like everyone, and just their mannerisms and everything, and the way they would like kind of like get in fun, or they would also just do like funny like we met in Northern Ireland. It's funny, you meet a lot of tough people, like they had especially the older people, they had a tough upbringing, and it would be funny because you meet this guy who's huge and tough, and invariably his best friend would be the tiniest, most joyful man in the world. And they were almost like cartoons, have
you ever read a comic called The Goon?
No.
You should read a comic called The Goon, because the Goon is a giant, very stern, and his tiny friend and they live in a town that is full of the most, you would love, I think it's Mike Mignola. Anyway,
I'm going to write that down right now.
Graphic novel, anyone, each one is self-contained graphic novels. A story of the Goon, and some of them are arcs, but if you get any of them, you'll get it, and it's beautifully drawn. He's actually a really good artist, and but
that's awesome. I'm gonna check that out.
It feels like he is sort of a giant old old Irish or old Scottish, sort of Irish, I think is the trope I think they're going with for sure.
Okay. I'm definitely going to check that out. Thank you.
You're welcome. And yeah, so the 4 trays has all the things you say?
It kind of has it doesn't do anything great, but it has all the things. It's got
the carpeting. It's
got the carpeting, the
explain.
aluminum siding. The other thing is like there's just scattered random menus everywhere because dive bars never have kitchens. They never ever have kitchens. Actually, that brings up another thing. My favorite dive bar in Akron, Ohio, used to be this bar that is no longer open. But when I went to the University of Akron, it was called Mitch's Lounge, and it had, unlike most dive bars, and this had a huge sign, and it said Mitch's Lounge and Restaurant. And I never once. My one buddy claims that one time a cook showed up while we would go there every Friday and every Saturday, like afternoon, and we never once saw the kitchen open. Okay. But he said like every once in a blue moon, a cook just would show up and start making food, but you just you had to be there at the time he decided to show up.
Wow.
But I think that goes back to our original point where like, I think that probably opened as an actual restaurant. And they probably didn't intend to open a dive bar, and like they had a harder time like ordering the food and staffing, and it just slowly morphed into a dive bar.
Right. You're just like, I know how to order the booze. I need to order the booze. So that's ordered for sure. What do you want to eat? I'm going to have a jar of pickled pig knuckles. Do you want that? You want an egg? There is a dive bar in my neighborhood in Van Nuys that is, I mean, it had to have started this. I mean, why would you name a bar the Liquid Zoo and not want people to be nuts?
Yeah.
And they have an open mic, and there's just like, but I do like a dive bar that is aspired to something. My mother, who passed away when I was very young, she used to go to a dive bar in South Milwaukee called Frenchie's.
Okay.
And it always made me think, and it was pre-Grease. Like that bar started, I think, in like the 60s.
Okay.
And so it wasn't like, but I think it was trying to be like ooh la la.
Yeah, like fancy.
South Milwaukee fancy. But it just had a couple of pool tables, and it was a golden opportunity to give a 4-year-old a maraschino cherry. Anyway, a great sign of a dive bar for me is if someone has brought their children. And they're just like, what are your kids doing? They're going to sit and stare at my phone in that place.
Yeah, well, it's easier to bring them now. You can give them electronics, I suppose.
Right. Well, and what I just did was I would just spin on the because it was pre.
Yeah.
I would just spin on the thing and then wander over, and then wander back, spin.
Yeah.
And then drink a lot of Sprite with maraschino cherries in it. Anyway, and then we would toddle off to the greasiest diner in the whole wide world called Lloyd's Lunch. And that did not serve beer, much I'm sure to everyone's chagrin, because they could have cut out the middleman.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if kids would like going to dive bars or not. Like on the upside, the bartender is going to let you have as much soda as you want.
Right.
If they have desserts, they'll probably let you have as much. I mean, you're policing yourself.
I tell this story every time I have someone on the Dork Forest who makes me think of it. Augie Smith. Do you know the stand-up comic Augie Smith?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So when he was a child, him and his older brother would go with his dad here in the Los Angeles area to the dive bar, to the bar. And they would sit in the car. And one time they sat in the car and bar time came, and the bartender came out and put his dad in the passenger side and said, just let him sleep it out. And then you guys, just crash in the car.
Okay.
And Augie's older brother made Augie drive them home. So Augie was 9. His brother was 11.
God.
His dad, it was a stick. His dad was a drunk in the passenger side. They're on the 405, which is a major,
Oh my God.
Going 30, 35 miles an hour. And I don't know if it's on one of his albums, but the story is epic. And they get pulled over. Like people were whizzing by all mad until they saw it was a shiny child. Then they're like, ah! And so finally they get pulled over, and the cop like starts hitting his dad just to wake him up. He's like, well, what is happening? And his dad, and the cop, I guess the punchline is the cop asked his dad, why was the younger kid driving? And and his dad, I guess, may or may not have said, well, obviously, because the older one can't drive a stick. So, but don't bring your children to a dive bar, you guys. And if you
not a dive bar. There's too many bars that are kid friendly now.
There's a
There's
Dave
no
and
reason.
Buster's. I went with Augie and his wife and their 3 children to Dave and Buster's the other night.
Yeah.
And that was and Augie, by the way, having soda, and Julie having a glass of wine, and it was the oldest child's birthday. It was actually the two kids' birthday, the baby. Anyway, it's a dive bar. It's a Chuck E. Cheese for grown-ups, Dave and Buster's.
It's great.
So yeah, it's loud. And so, but Sean Bair-Flannery, it has been an hour, you should know.
Oh, it has. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
And we got through all of your favorite dive bars, and I should probably tell people where to go for help if they think they have a drinking problem. But you'll know. You don't need me to tell.
Yeah, sometimes they find you.
Right, exactly. And sometimes it's court ordered.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you so much for doing the show, Sean Flannery. And it's Sean Bair-Flannery on all the things. It'll be in the notes. Places I Can't Return to is the book. The Blackout Diaries is the podcast. Thanks for doing the show.
Thank you so much, Jackie. I've had a blast.
And Rangers, you know the rules out there. Take care of each other.
My hat, my hat, my hat. They're dancing around my hat. My hat, my hat, my hat. Well, what do you think of that? If it looks like a Mexican hat dance and it sounds like a Mexican hat dance, it's most likely a Mexican hat dance. So take off your hat and let's dance.
Yay! Oh my God. Why don't we just call that as the end of the show?